President Juan Manuel Santos to step forward to deliver the Nobel Peace Prize lecture for 2016.
El sol de la paz brilla por fin en el cielo de Colombia y que su luz ilumine al mundo entero. Muchas gracias.
For millions of people who lived outside of Colombia, it might seem appropriate that Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos won the Nobel Peace Prize because they assumed that his peace accord with FARC terrorists will reduce violence. But it's not so. The perception abroad of Colombia's guerrillas is the product of propaganda. The guerrillas did not arise from spontaneous peasant movements. Their origin is the Communist Party, and their development began during the Cold War. Soviet funding and the alliance of the Communist Party with powerful families in Colombia's Liberal Party gave rise to the guerrillas in the 1950s. The triumph of Fidel Castro fueled the subsequent revolutionary fever in the universities, which is where most of the guerrillas came from. Santos belongs to the most powerful family in the country, owners of the country's most widely circulated newspaper, and leaders of the so-called oligarchy. Propaganda would have many believe that the communist guerrillas rose up against those families. But in fact, those were the very families that created and controlled the guerrillas. In 1974, Enrique Santos Calderón, President Santos' elder brother, along with author Gabriel García Márquez, founded a magazine to promote communist and guerrilla groups. Through the magazine, they actively collaborated with the M19 terrorist group, which received funding from Cuba. In 1985, the M19 took over the Palace of Justice, set fire to the building, and murdered the magistrates by order of drug king Pablo Escobar, who paid them $2 million to do it.
El patrón financió lo del Palacio de Justicia con $2 millones. Eso empezó a gestarse desde Nicaragua, cuando Álvaro Fayá lo llevó.
Between 2002 and 2010, the FARC was defeated by the government of Álvaro Uribe Vélez, who had named Santos as his Minister of Defense. In the 2010 presidential elections, Santos ran on Uribe's platform, but his position changed immediately after his inauguration. He met with Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, calling him his new best friend, and started making deals with the regimes under Castro's influence. In 2010, the FARC had been defeated and had sought refuge in Venezuela and Ecuador, where Hugo Chávez's government provided them with financial support and training.
Although Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and Hugo Chavez differ in many ways, they share a common enemy, the United States. And according to U.S. officials, drug smuggling also connects and helps fund these dangerous networks. West Africa is the center of their interest in this multi-billion-dollar business.
Virtually every flight that goes to West Africa today that is bearing cocaine or other drugs is coming from Venezuela.
He says Chavez has long-standing ties to Colombian drug traffickers.
It's well established even before he was president. He had ties to these guerrillas and to the narco-traffickers. And he has basically made Venezuelan territory readily available to them.
3 Al-Qaeda agents from North Africa recently pleaded guilty to drug smuggling and terrorism charges in a U.S. federal court. They admitted to working with Colombian drug traffickers.
But, as if following a previously agreed upon scheme, Enrique Santos Calderón traveled to Cuba to initiate peace negotiations with the FARC. So it was that the promoter of communist terrorism ended up in the charge of the negotiations. The FARC returned to Colombia, and between 2010 and 2013, forced recruitment of child soldiers, kidnapping, extortion, illegal mining, and cocaine production and trafficking skyrocketed, as did the murder of soldiers and police officers. But the Santos government isn't only characterized by its alliance with the region's criminal dictatorships and with terrorists, which have increased coca cultivation and production to unprecedented levels. It is also known for its ruthless persecution of the opposition, thanks to the control the communists have of the judicial system. Every possible rival to Santos has been prosecuted and convicted, some for crimes that don't exist, and in this case of Andrés Felipe Arias, currently exiled in the United States, some through the use of false witnesses or evidence. And some have been victims of assassination attempts, such as former Minister of Justice Fernando Londoño. By 2012, the government confirmed that negotiations were underway in Cuba, and that Cuba, the same regime that had armed and trained the terrorists, would serve as a guarantor for the process along with Norway. The negotiations are also accompanied by the government of Venezuela, which is known to collaborate with international terrorists in numerous ways, and Chile, which is currently controlled by a Castro-inspired leftist government. Venezuela offers material support to Islamic terrorist groups Hamas and Hezbollah, providing them with Venezuelan documents in order to facilitate travel for their terrorist activities.
Mi nombre es Misael López Soto. Soy funcionario del CICPC. En mayo de 2013 fui comisionado como consejero de la Embajada de Venezuela ante la República de Irak. Desde mi llegada al cargo advertí cómo, bajo la mirada complaciente de los diplomáticos de esa misión, empleados locales vendían visas, pasaportes, certificados de nacimiento y otro tipo de documentación venezolana. Las personas que pagaban por estos servicios normalmente eran procedentes de Siria, Irak, Palestina y en algunos casos Pakistán. Por ello pagaban cantidades entre 5 y 15 mil dólares, dependiendo del caso. Muchas veces estaban vinculados a grupos terroristas, en su mayoría de tendencia chiita.
In awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to Santos, the Nobel Committee also rewarded Venezuela and Cuba, regimes with which Santos collaborates fully. For example, when Venezuelan cocaine kingpin Walid Makhlid was captured in Colombia, Santos refused to extradite him to the United States, repatriating him to Venezuela instead. Santos has also pressured the Organization of American States to prevent it from evoking the Democratic Charter on Venezuela. Santos has also prevented an investigation into Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro's nationality, who appears to be Colombian. Cuba and Venezuela have both been identified by U.S. courts as being complicit in the FARC's terrorist and drug trafficking activities.
Thank you so much, Chairman Duncan and Ranking Member Sears. When discussing the ongoing peace talks between the Colombian government and the U.S. designated terrorist group, FARC, it is vital that we examine all the ramifications. And the first problem is where these talks are being held. In Cuba, where under the auspices of the Castro regime, where repression is the order of the day. But it isn't just the Castro brothers who have known sympathies for terrorists and a proclivity for undermining U.S. interests whenever and wherever possible, who have been acting as interlocutors. Maduro in Venezuela and Chavez before him have also been doing this. The Castro brothers, Maduro and Chavez, when he was alive, cannot be trusted, cannot be seen as neutral interlocutors because they all benefited greatly from their relationship with the terrorist group FARC through financing by the drug trade.
And Norway had a clear conflict of interest in awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to Santos, given that it's one of the guarantors of the negotiations and that the president of the Nobel Committee served on the board of the state-controlled oil company Statoil, which has been awarded significant exploration licenses by the Santos government.
Marchando con mi pueblo porque hay un presidente traidor que le está entregando el país a la FARC y aquí nadie lo quiere.
Furthermore, the prize was awarded after Colombian voters rejected the agreement with the terrorists in a national plebiscite.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2016 to Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos.
There has been a referendum in Colombia, and the people have said no to this particular peace treaty. Isn't it a little disrespectful of the democracy of Colombia that you now give the Peace Prize to the president?
No, on the contrary, we clearly show that we, of course, respect a democratic process and the democratic vote of the Colombian people.
As such, the award supported the undemocratic imposition of a deal that was rejected in a democratic exercise. The victory of the opposition in the plebiscite was achieved despite the Santos government's treacherous machinations to guarantee a win. According to the Colombian constitution, in order for a plebiscite to be valid, it must have the participation of 50% of the electorate. Santos lowered this threshold to 13%. Santos formulated a single leading question to induce voters to answer yes. When confronted about the nature of the question, he answered, "I'll ask whatever question I want to ask."
El presidente tiene la facultad de redactar la pregunta que se le dé la gana.
He used public resources to promote the yes vote and even bribed people publicly to vote for the agreement.
Con una comparación entre el amor político y el personal, el presidente Juan Manuel Santos fue muy claro durante un evento en Barranquilla.
De que así, como en la vida personal, uno expresa los amores de diferentes formas, en la vida política el amor se expresa de la novia hacia acá con votos y aquí hacia allá con presupuesto de inversiones.
También estuvo en la entrega de 360 apartamentos. Allí insistió en la búsqueda de la paz.
But in the end, the outcome of the plebiscite was irrelevant. Santos simply ignored the citizens' vote, made some superficial changes to the agreement, and submitted it to a well-greased Congress for ratification. The alliance with Castro's backed regimes, the flagrant violation of Colombia's constitution, the revocation of a democratic vote, the annulment of the division of powers, the persecution of the opposition, the buying and manipulation of the media, and the out-of-control increase in corruption and cocaine production all define the regime that Santos has created under the tutelage of his Cuban consultants. A narco-failed state that threatens the peace and stability of the region and the West.